students and adults alike are addicted to their cell phone. It's just scientifically proven. I have seen students use it for homework, research. I've seen them use it for games. I've seen them use it for social media. I've seen them use it for texting their friends or communicating with their parents.
Most of the time, the students, they're just like behind someone, so they have their phones like behind like someone's back, so the teacher can't see. And then like when the teacher walks by, they just like quickly hide it.
I feel like some students are very captivated by it, and they're stuck to it, and that inhibits their learning because they don't study, they don't do their homework, and they just come to school, watch TV on their phone.
Phones, it's like a drug, it's an addiction to us. When we don't have it, what do we do?
One day when I just got tired of trying to fight for kids, I don't like to fight, I never fight. Fighting for kids' attention, I just simply pulled this out and I said, hey guys, how about this? Everybody put your cell phone in there.
According to a recent study, 95% of adolescents own a cell phone, and 45% report going online, quote, almost constantly. This leads us to raise the question, what are the impacts of cell phone usage in schools? And what policies and practices are in place to manage students' problematic cell phone use during instructional hours?
This is going to be my 21st year. In the first couple years, a couple kids had them. They were the bricks, with the telescoping antenna, and everyone was jealous, and it wasn't a problem because you couldn't use it. No text, no nothing. And then the little razors came out, and they started to infiltrate, and teachers were of the mindset, put your phones away. You darn kids, you don't need these phones. And first it was 2, then 5, and then as the years crept by, it's everyone. It's 99%. We lost the war. And I think the smart teachers figured out the war is over. And if you think of it like as a war, we lost. Everyone has a cell phone, so we have to roll with this.
At this age, because they are so concerned about what others think about themselves and what's going on in other people's lives and things like that, it's their lifeline. Like, they really do. I used to think it was a joke when they came out with that term FOMO, the fear of missing out. But now I look at these teens and I go, no, that's what they have. They are so afraid that in 5 minutes they might miss out on some trend, some piece of gossip, something that someone's boyfriend or girlfriend or what. They're so afraid that they're going to miss out that they do not know how to survive without their cell phones. They don't know what to do without them. And I've seen kids absolutely freak out because they put it in a different pocket in their backpack and they can't find their phones. And I've seen kids reduced to tears because they can't find their phones. They don't know how to survive without them.
Cell phones play an important role in adolescents' daily life and significantly impact their cognitive development.
In early adolescence, particularly, brain development has a large role in susceptibility to addiction. So our prefrontal cortex finishes developing by around age 25, and that's the part of the brain that helps control impulses, regulate action. In early adolescence, that part of the brain is starting to reorganize and further develop, and our limbic system, which is the reward center, is also developing. So there's actually a heightened reward sensitivity in early adolescence and not yet the regulation capabilities in the prefrontal cortex. And so early adolescence, 13, 14, there's a lot of susceptibility to all kinds of addiction.
When I don't have my phone with me, I feel restless sometimes. Like sometimes, did someone message me? Or like, did this person reply to me yet? Or like, did I get that email that I was looking for, that I was really worried about getting? Did I get that yet? So I constantly thinking about like what's happening, and I feel really distant from the world when I don't have my phone with me.
I would say many of people in my generation have been adapting to cell phone usage. Like, all the time we constantly do social media, watch YouTube, and communicate with friends that often we forget about the things in life that are also important to us, and that in turn also messes with our sense of discipline. And because of that, many people neglect to understand that what we do now can affect us in the future.
Not only are cell phones addicting to many students, they have considerable impact on classroom instruction.
Overall, it's becoming more and more of a negative experience as well as a distraction for the students. I think there was a lot of effort by educators trying to incorporate the cell phone usage and technology usage of cell phones in the class so that it's not necessarily viewed so negative, but I believe over time it's evident that it's become more of a distraction than it is an asset to their education.
Admittedly, I use my cell phone a lot of times inappropriately, as in like at inappropriate times during class or when I'm supposed to be taking notes and such. I used my cell phone excessively during my freshman year. So because of that, I outright failed most of my classes. A lot of my teachers were disappointed in me.
Look, there's been plenty of studies that have shown if a student is allowed to have their cell phone on their body during class, even though they're not looking at the screen, those vibrations are distractions. Part of it is when you're trying to learn content, or even if you're just having a conversation with somebody, you're trying to be totally present in that moment, be totally focused. And if your cell phone vibrates, whether you realize it or not, your attention is taken away from that conversation or from that lecture or from that assignment. And so, like I said, it's hard for students. You know, it's hard for anybody in general to compete with that.
Though many teachers try to incorporate cell phone usage into their classroom instruction, in some cases allowing students to use cell phones for an assignment ends up being a detriment rather than an educational experience.
Teachers want us to use cell phone for school purposes, but in reality, a cell phone literally has everything that once you take out a cell phone for school, you can access the other things as well that it can be used for, which gets just students and distracted in general. Like for example, my teacher, like some of my teachers, they tell me to take out my phone for the classroom, but then I see other text messages from other people, like of my friends, once I take it out. So then, or like I get notifications or like just things in general that pop up, and I'm like, oh, and I get distracted. I want to open those things instead of like actually doing what the teacher told me to, or like when I have free time in class, I'll just try to quickly like take a peek. So I think it's distracting either way. I don't think it's helpful.
One class that was reading the book The Odyssey, and that teacher was playing the audio book in the background, and he was even keeping up and highlighting text so that way students could know where they were, and they had the books in front of them. But every single student was on their phones with their headphones on, doing something else on their phones, and that was really sad. And then I hear and they complain about why they have bad grades. A lot of teachers are kind of just giving up because it appears that the freshmen of this generation don't appear to care, and that's sad to see, like a teacher becoming a teacher because they want to, and they're putting their whole heart out to teach us for the future, and it's just basically the students are just spitting on them and smacking them in the face. It's terrible.
There are many factors that contribute to cell phone use during class, and much of it depends on students' self-discipline.
Well, a lot of the factors determining whether a student would reach for their cell phone in class or not there's a lot of variables because, yes, the teacher and the learning environment is important, but it's also about the person because some people are more, I guess, dependent on their phones than others.
There's a lot that the screen or the media provides for the kids in the area of entertainment, and it's much easier to be entertained, not have to think, as opposed to doing work where it requires a lot more energy and a lot more focus. So having a cell phone available to students where discipline is hard to come by already, I believe that just encourages them to waste the time as opposed to those that know how to discipline themselves. I mean, there's probably like 10% of the class, like 4 or 5 students on average, where they're focused no matter what, whether it's free time, whether it's lecture, whether it's activities. So whether you give them a cell phone or not, it doesn't affect them. I'm willing to argue it's around the area of like 80%, 70%, where you offer them a cell phone and they're more willing to use it, socialize and become distracted or free time, as opposed to investing that time to do work with it.
While many students use cell phones during school hours, does cell phone usage impact students equally?
It's a way to check out, because sometimes it's more of, I don't know what I'm doing. So back in the day, and even now in my class, because they don't have a cell phone, it's doodling, right? Because I don't understand the lesson, so I'm just going to draw a picture. I don't understand the lesson, I'm going to just play on my cell phone, right? And that's what I think happens in other teachers' classes. In my class, they might doodle. In another teacher's class, they might be on their cell phone. I don't know what I'm doing anyway, and I got an F in the class, so why pay attention because I'm failing? I'll just play on my phone instead.
In most of the classes where the teachers say no phone use and most students seem to engage perfectly with the teacher, I see that probably the environment and the way that the teacher teaches and the way how they're able to competently control their students and effectively engage with them in such a way that they're able to learn properly is one way that probably discourages phone use and helps them really want to learn rather than just using their phones all the time.
I do have kids that are straight A, and yes, they do have a cell phone problem. And then I have the far end kids where they're only on their cell phones. They refuse to do any work. I have not seen a case where I can pinpoint the use of their cell phone in class like gradually brings down their grades. So it's really hard to make an assessment on that. To me, it's you can see it on both sides. However, for the kids that are doing well, I would like to argue it would be hindering their live or in-person communication skills.
Problematic use of cell phones in class impacts each student differently. For some, it negatively affects their grades, and for others, it impacts their communication skills and mental well-being.
I definitely think that there is an impact on mental health, and I feel like this is really we're just now seeing the impacts of a generation that was sort of raised on cell phones, right? Had access to them when they were young and used them regularly. And I think that what the impact is, or where the impact has been the greatest, is sort of actually disconnecting students or disconnecting teens from their peers and from like real world connections, real life connections. I often will walk around the campus. I'm a school social worker and I work at the high school at the Student Support Center. And when we were in person and not in this distance learning model, I would see kiddos sitting in a circle and they all would have their phones out, their screens out, and they would be texting to each other on their screens. So I really think that it's kind of a barrier to connection, to human connection.
A lot of them are just really getting to the point where they're not communicating, right? If they're in an uncomfortable place where they don't know a kid next to them, what do? They get on their cell phone. You see this at lunchtime, right? You see a kid sitting by themselves at lunch, just playing on their cell phone. And they don't have friends around them, right? They're just sitting there. And I'm like, man, how do we get this kid integrated with other kids, right? What do we do? And so a couple kids will kind of wander into my classroom sometimes, and I'll start talking to them. Hey, how was your weekend? How are things going? Trying to bring out their personality. Oh, Calvin over there is sitting in the room. Why don't you go sit by him? You know, he's in your class, right? And I'm like, these kids really need to learn how to socialize. They don't know how. They've lost a lot of the skills that, people like me and back in we're in our 50s now, that we didn't have that distraction, right? They're really good at texting each other. They can do that. They can FaceTime each other. But sometimes when it's face-to-face, they can't do it.
Often, when we see students sitting alone using their cell phones with limited face-to-face interaction, we make the assumption that there is a problem. However, cell phones and access to social media and online communities can provide important avenues for many students to develop their self-identity.
So there is a lot of research that adolescents do a lot of identity work through social media, through Instagram, having some of the ways they present themselves that can be in kind of healthy exploration ways. It's common for teenagers to experiment with their identity, to present themselves to other people, give feedback, and so social media can be useful for that. Again, as with everything, there can be the other side as well, which is there can be a pressure to present a sort of false identity. And we do see higher rates of depression when teenagers feel like they aren't able to align their kind of genuine identity with their projected identity. And so social media can make that something they feel more pressure to do. Many teens kind of work through that over experimentation, but it's something that parents and teachers should be having an active conversation about. How are you presenting yourself to people? How is this making you feel? How true is this to yourself? So it can really provide, I think, especially for some youth who are having trouble finding their identity in their own peer groups, in their high schools. In some ways, it gives them access to other people. So there are a lot of studies looking at LGBTQ youth, and social media can play an important role in helping them find community and people to affirm their identity.
About half of the time, the trigger for a student that comes to see me, let's say in a crisis, is somehow linked to social media. So whether that be, that they posted something online that got them into the Student Support Center, or that they read a post that somebody made about them. So oftentimes it can trigger these kind of real big emotional responses in kids. So I definitely see cell phones being connected to some of the suffering that I help kids with.
Using cell phones as a vehicle to form meaningful social relationships might lead to negative interpersonal relationships as well. In fact, a study by the Pew Research Center found that 59% of teens reported experiencing some form of cyberbullying.
Just a cell phone in general, it makes it easier for other people to do those things like bully you and like cyberbully others and basically create more drama into your life. So I personally was like cyberbullied as a kid, where I had like some people made a group chat with me, with all of us together, and my like close friend made a group chat with me and like her other friends, and so they started my close friends. I thought she was my close friend, but her and her friends together in that group chat started bullying me, and it really affected me. It really hurt me, and it really lowered my self-confidence.
Cyberbullying can be an extremely painful and traumatic experience. We have to keep in mind that adolescence is a developmental period when teenagers are starting to expand their peer networks, which means that they're starting to build connections outside of the family context. So this can be very exciting because it means that they're starting to make new friends. But at the same time, it could also be scary because it does require a level of vulnerability as they leave the comfort zone of their family. Research on bullying has shown that when teenagers are being socially excluded or being victimized and rejected by their friends, the same parts of the brain that are associated with physical pain are activated. So what this means is that when teenagers are being rejected by their friends or being called nasty names by students at their school, it's just as painful as being inflicted by physical pain, like falling down or getting punched.
So I've had some friends that where they were trying to do work and get important things done, but like, for example, they got a text message from someone saying like some mean things, and so that ruined their whole day, and they're on their phone all day like seeing what happened, like what's wrong, and figuring like things out. So that really affected them from their studies. Instead of concentrating on schoolwork, they were thinking of that. And I also have other friends where they have put themselves out there, like taking pictures of of themselves or like videos of themselves, like for example, social media, and they've gotten hate. And so what they do is um, they end up like thinking poorly about themselves and like constantly thinking about like the hate and like the social media and what's going on in this like little world.
There was a case in which two students recorded themselves having intercourse and put it on Snapchat, and it wasn't long before all of the kids in the school, or many of the kids in the school, had seen it. And of course, that led to their being disciplined because people were able to identify them, but still, it was a big disturbance in class, a big disturbance throughout the school. And it's just a matter of hypercommunication, kids doing what sometimes misguided kids will do, but with way more power to reach many people very quickly.
Bullying has always been an issue, right? Bullying is not a new issue, right? But the relentless sort of aspect of it that comes from being constantly connected via social media, via text threads, via, all these different, platforms that students use to be connected, whether it's Instagram or something like that. That piece has become really, really dangerous and detrimental to kiddos' well-being, because it used to be that, let's say that somebody, bullied you at school, but then when you left school, that bullying stopped, and so there was a break. And what has happened with the constant connection is that there is no break, there is no respite, which can be terrorizing, quite frankly. And so there is definitely a correlation between cell phone use and just the relentless, right, like barrage of insult when a student is being bullied. I would say also that I think the screen disconnects people, and they behave in a certain way that maybe they wouldn't in person. It almost gives some anonymity in some ways, and I think that kids are more brutal online, and there also is that sort of mentality of like, maybe somebody says something on a thread and then other people jump in, and then it really sort of snowballs and escalates. So I have seen kiddos that have really been traumatized by bullying. And oftentimes there is an aspect of that bullying that happens on the phone, if not most of it, right? A lot of times when kiddos are struggling from a mental health perspective, there is the ability to trace back some bullying in their history. And for this generation, that happens usually on the phone.
Cyberbullying is associated with an increased risk of mental health issues, which can potentially have negative impacts on students' academic performance.
Without sound mental health, really students are not able to be successful academically. I mean, it's really kind of necessary to our functioning to have sound mental health. And so when kiddos are struggling with depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues, it really impacts their ability to be successful as students.
There are many negative impacts associated with problematic use of cell phones and social media. Nevertheless, cell phones can be a powerful tool at school. Students and teachers use a variety of apps to access a vast amount of information online, to connect with each other, and to learn new things.
I would say from a technology standpoint, like it's pretty cool that kids have the amount of power that they have. Kids in the power of a smartphone can search anything, look up anything, connect with people all over the world in a variety of different ways. So in terms of like the technology of accessing materials and resources, it's incredible.
I have seen cell phones having a place in the classroom. When teachers are very intentional about how they use them, it can be a useful tool. They can also be a distraction, which I think a lot of people think about. But I've seen teachers use the video features of cell phones to help them recreate like Hamlet projects, Shakespeare, take things they're reading and recast them in their own words to explore their environment. A lot of the work I do, teachers will have youth do asset mapping in their community to see what some of the community strengths are and needs, and having cell phones to take pictures and put together into a mapping software or something like that can really help make the classroom more mobile. In some of the low-income high schools that I've visited, the cell phones were actually a critical resource for internet access for many youth, where the Wi-Fi wasn't working in the school. That's not how it should be, but it was an advantage that some teachers were able to allow students to search the internet even when this Wi-Fi wasn't working in the school or they didn't have access to the computer lab.
One of the cool things, besides all the stuff, being connected everywhere with the phone with students is when you're in the classroom, when you're in a teacher, sometimes you need resources really, really quick. So a lot of it is how do you build background information for our students? So I'm gonna give you an example, right? So I'm talking to my elementary class and, we're talking about, the difference between tigers and lions. Well, what we're capable of doing now is we're now capable of using virtual reality or augmented reality, I should say, not virtual, augmented reality, where we can get a tiger on our phone and then we can put it against a child so we can see, how big a tiger would be, how big a lion would be, how big a giraffe would be, and put it in the environment that students can realize. And we can easily then share the information that's happening on my phone onto either a projector or an Apple TV, some type of projection system. So the whole class, and the reality is this, it's not whether or not I have it in my hands, it's when I'm capable of pulling out that tiger and giving it to my students so they can start learning and they can start building that background information on their own.
Cell phones are similar to any other tool. The power of the device is harnessed differently by each user. In the classroom, the benefits of cell phones tend to fluctuate according to how teachers and students use them in the classroom.
I think that cell phones can have a positive impact on our academics because we're able to access so much information thanks to the internet. But it really depends on how we use it, like if we use it responsibly instead of just like talking with our friends using FaceTime during class or a lecture.
I use it as a very powerful tool. When we're in class, I have Quizlets. A lot of my kids are using Quizlet on their phone. It's just so much easier. It's visually appealing. It feels like a digital flashcard versus using it on a monitor. YouTube. Many students are watching YouTube on the go, and so I provide them with YouTube content that they can watch on their cell phone, on the go. So it's a valuable tool if used correctly with students.
An example that I have is in my Viet class. So since we often use Quizlet to learn vocabulary easier, we often do Quizlet Lives, which is like a test taken between groups live. And like with us competing, it would make us want to like learn faster, better, so we would get a better score and like the extra credit that you'd give us. So like giving a reward, I guess, while also being able to use our phones would make it like the class more fun and us more inclined to like respect the rules.
There are so many apps out there where you can get instant feedback from students through surveys, through questions, through even quizzes for checking for understanding. And so that's an area that I think we should focus on to help teachers, particularly when it comes to in-person assessment and getting feedback on the students' learning immediately. And so that's an area that we can grow in.
In the 2019-2020 school year, COVID-19 dramatically changed the way we teach, learn, and connect with each other.
Well, certainly today with the pandemic, it's critical that our teachers have better access with students. And so not only are they teaching online through like Zoom or Google Meets, Google Classroom, but they also have the ability to use their cell phone and the various of apps that are out there to connect with students, either through text messaging and or through the ability to use a platform with an application that students can submit their work to teachers. They can record various projects and then send those to teachers. So it's really a critical tool for students to use nowadays.
The role of cell phones and technology in general has shifted dramatically during COVID-19. I mean, there's no getting around that. It has allowed us to connect with students. I posted something on my social media a while back. Can you imagine if we went into this lockdown 10 years ago or 15 years ago when we still had, dial-up, or we were still using overhead projectors, and can you imagine having to shift to this type of learning environment? Google Classroom hadn't even been invented yet. The idea of connecting to someone over the internet through video, really new 10 years ago. And so I wouldn't say lucky, but we're in a better place now than we would have been 10 years ago.
Access to cell phones and technology are crucial to students' learning experience during the pandemic. Many teachers rely on various apps on their cell phones to deliver content and to connect with students.
I think there's a couple things where cell phones have become a positive. One, a lot of my students will log into Zoom on their cell phone and then use their Chromebook or their laptop as an ancillary. And if you think about this, a lot of teachers during this pandemic, at least myself, when we're operating on Zoom, most educators will tell you, have dual monitors, have 2 screens. I have the luxury where the district has provided me with one. They've given me a second monitor. Some of these students, they don't have the means to purchase a second monitor. And so what they've done is they've used their cell phone as a second monitor. They listen to me on Zoom, and then they do their work on their Chromebook.
Many of our school districts, like ourselves, we didn't have enough devices to go out to every single student. So we were then, connecting with our parents and our families to use whatever technology they had around. And what do most people have around when they don't have a computer? They have a cell phone. So with the cell phone, our students were capable, because we couldn't send out, bilingual books, right? So we had to teach them tools, how they can translate things on the fly through their phones, how they can take a picture instead of, sending documentations. How are they going to be able to turn in their homework? So we showed them apps like, something like Google Keep, where they can take a picture, they can annotate it, they can sign it, they can, fill it out, and then send it in. So the phone is pretty much an all-in-one, and many people understand that this little guy now takes place of a video camera, of a phone, of a fax machine, of a Scantron sheet, right? And it's no longer just writing for assessment or showing what the students know to teachers just by writing. With the phone, the students can use multi-modes of showing what they know, which is very important in today's world, because no one sits behind a desk and writes an essay anymore and turn that in. The way we solve problems is by learning on the fly and by pivoting. And the best way of doing that is something that you always have around you, which is a mobile device.
To me, classroom culture is extremely important. That's how I connect to my kids. It's that human connection. And these are those moments outside of class time, break, lunch, after school, moments before class starts. These are very important moments when you can connect with students, especially students who have kind of started drifting away a little bit. How do you connect with them? I have an Instagram page dedicated to just my class. The stuff I post on Instagram is, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's science related, but it's certainly not that academic setting. To me, that's like that break time. It's the time away from class. And kids do interact with me on social media. And the thing is, I'm trying to leverage the power of what they're already connected to. So they're connected to Instagram. They're looking at Instagram. I want to harness that. I want to bring that in. And so that's why I connect to it, because I know it's something that they use. I don't expect teachers to set up an Instagram account, but again, this is one of the ways that I use it to stay connected with my students.
Cell phones are ubiquitous in many high schools, raising the question, what policies are in place to manage students' cell phone use?
Well, I think our current cell phone policy is pretty consistent. You are allowed to have the cell phone on your possession You're allowed to check your cell phone as you're walking to and from class, but when you enter the classroom, the cell phone needs to be put away until that teacher allows you to use it. So I think that's pretty consistent. And just like grading, or just like how a teacher does the art of teaching, that changes from classroom to classroom, but the consistency is that the cell phone should be off during class time unless the teacher allows it.
At the beginning of the school year, we were all handed syllabuses, and a lot of them included cell phone usage. And for my senior classes, luckily we all understood it very well. We were only allowed to use cell phones during at appropriate times, and our teachers would always tell us when we can use it. And we would use it for the dictionary purposes, research on books, and even there's 5 minutes before class ends, and we're allowed to use our phones freely.
The cell phone policy in classes, it can be out at certain times and it's put away at certain times. And I'll let them know when they can. And it's more than just me saying, I am allowing you to use your cell phone. It's really more about what is the task at hand? And is the cell phone going to enrich that task, or is it going to detract from that task? And I think that's a very important distinction. And I talk to my students about this. I tell them, I'm not taking away your cell phones because I hate cell phones, because I use my cell phone all the time. The reason I'm having you put away your cell phones is because I know that it's a distraction, not just because I think it's a distraction. Scientifically, if you look at your cell phone, it takes you longer to refocus on the task you were just on. And so I tell them, if we're learning new content for the very first time, I need your undivided attention, and I cannot compete with your cell phone. Just as if they were telling me something for the first time, I shouldn't be on my cell phone because I'm not going to absorb the content correctly.
Despite the fact that some school districts discourage cell phone use during instructional hours, the implementation of school cell phone policies is at the discretion of each teacher. Some classes are more successful at limiting students' cell phone use than others.
Not only is it through my high school, even through middle school, there's been that don't use your phone in class. It'll be like that in the beginning of the year. And then as the time goes by, as we do more work, as we end up having to rely on our phones for having to search something up or use a calculator and etc., teachers become, in my opinion, I think they become more lax on the cell phone policy. And I know they try to have that rule where it's like they don't use your phone unless I say so. But even if the teacher is giving its lecture or its lesson, you'll find, like if you come into a normal classroom, you'll find a lot of students just using their phone just on the sideline or not even listening to the teacher's lecture.
For literally like a week, I'd pass by this room every morning and the kid was on the cell phone. So I asked the teacher, I said, why do you let that kid who sits by the door on his cell phone? Oh, I asked him to put it away. He just won't do it. I said, what grade is he getting in your class? And she'll say, an F. And I'll say, oh, great. So what is it? So yeah, he's wrong for being on it, but the teacher is allowing it. So where's the issue here? Is it the teacher because the teacher's not strong enough? Is it the student, or is it a joint effort, right?
It's not an issue with phones. It's an issue with an established culture about when I'm presenting to you, please give me your attention. So I address that by physically removing the phone from everybody for certain periods of time. And I see you looking over here at this 5-gallon tank, which has been repurposed so many times. I used to breed fighting fish in this, still got the thermometer. And one day when I just got tired of trying to fight for kids, I don't like to fight, I never fight. Fighting for kids' attention, I just simply pulled this out and I said, hey guys, how about this? Everybody put your cell phone in there. I now have a culture where students walk in, put their phone in there, and on days when I'm not going to give any lecture, I usually do the courtesy of writing on the board or telling them, hey, you can hang on to your phones if you want. I'm not going to lecture.
If like all the students like respect the teacher, let's say like they're not like, I don't know, strict, but like if they're like a nice or like a cool person, then like the majority of the class would follow the rules, but like there's a few who wouldn't follow the rules. So I think most of it, like the policy, it like depends on the teacher who gives out the policy?
I'd probably say one of my English teachers that I used to have. The way he operated his classroom was we would count our attendance by putting our phones into like a certain bin, I guess, or like we would have a designated place to put our cell phones in, and if our cell phones aren't there, he counts us as absent. So as long as our cell phones aren't there, then he'll count us as, we're there, we're not absent. But they have to stay there for the entire class period just so that we can't, go to them. In other words, our cell phones counted as our attendance.
We're concerned about our kids that are failing, right? And so one of the first things is we got to get them here, right? And we got to get them to pay attention. And if the cell phone is their distraction, they're not getting even to step 2. So I feel like it is absorbing their learning time, right? So I think it is one of the most important issues we have to deal with. We have to stop being in denial, right? We see other districts are pulling them away and putting them in pouches and stuff. I don't feel like we have to be that extreme yet, but really I feel like if we had everybody know that there's not supposed to be out during class unless there's an activity that the teacher is allowing. We had that going on. Look how much more learning time they'd have, right?
As far as my experience at my school site, I appreciate the fact that they allow teachers the autonomy to decide how they're going to use technology inside of their classroom. Not everyone's as comfortable with technology as I am. So if they have a strict no cell phone policy, that's fine, so long as a school site is going to support that teacher. I think it's really, really important that if a school site is going to give teachers autonomy, that they support that autonomy.
Managing problematic use of cell phones during class can be a challenge. Some people have suggested that one way to address this issue is by incorporating cell phone use in classroom instruction and providing fair and consistent classroom policies.
Cell phones now have been around for a whole generation, and our teachers have had to adapt to the use of cell phones. So when I was a former principal, I was one of the early believers that students should be allowed to have access to their cell phone during the day. As we all know, when adults leave a meeting, the first thing they do is check their cell phone. They check for text messages, they check for voice messages, they check their email. And young adults, teenagers in high school are the same. And so I think it's critical that, one, we accept it as a part of our technology, and that the more teachers are open to using technology in the classroom, particularly with cell phones, we should embrace that, as opposed to try to hold to the strict rules of no cell phone use.
Your real life involves a cell phone. At my job, well, I'm at my job right now, I use this all the time. As summer school principal, I am responding literally every minute to people. If I had to go, this is such a privileged thing to say, but if I had to go to my desktop every time and sit and respond to an email and not a text, it would take forever. This is a preview of what the rest of their lives are going to look like. I promise there are going to be some, anywhere from doctor to engineer to barista, they're going to be on their cell phone for at least part of their day. I mean, whether it's their customer service and they're just kind of taking a break doing stuff, responding back to their boyfriend or something, or they're a doctor and they're actually looking something up on their phone, like a medication choice or something. This is part of your life. It's going to be a part of your life, and it's going to be a growing part of your life because they're just getting bigger and smarter and more intrusive. So this is a preview of things to come. Might as well get used to it.
I think if teachers are very clear and transparent and consistent with their cell phone use policy, that's the most important thing. Particularly when students are entering class or as they're leaving, it's just human nature nowadays for you to check your cell phone. So if we allow students to check their cell phone before the class actually starts, they'll be less likely to look at their cell phone during the class. And then when teachers are allowing students to use their cell phone, it just needs to be very clear the time for that. There's also a lot of downtime at times during the classroom time, or independent study. And so if a student is able to listen to music with their headphones on, I think we need to allow students to demonstrate how to be responsible with cell phone, just like adults have to demonstrate how they'll be responsible for cell phone use at their work and during their meetings. So I think being fair, consistent, and transparent around the policy is critical.
In addition to having consistent classroom cell phone policies, providing students with guidance and modeling positive cell phone behaviors is effective in managing problematic cell phone use during class.
It's not a phone problem. It's not necessarily a technology problem. It still comes back to kids are naive because they're kids. Kids are immature because they're immature. They're not mature yet. We don't expect them to be mature. Adults are immature. Sometimes they really ought not be, but sometimes adults are too. Sometimes I am. And it comes down to kids need guidance to learn to navigate bounds of what's appropriate and what's not, what's rude and what's not, that kind of thing.
Which is why I think that having discussions with students about the science of cell phone use is important so that they understand what's happening to their brain. And I'm not saying that that's going to stop it, but at least they're aware of the fact that it really is kind of affecting them on like a hormonal level.
I think the only way we can encourage them is, other than teaching from saying so, is to actually show them real life examples that maybe cell phones aren't just for going on social media, for watching dumb videos, or for pastime. You can use your phone, whether it's to help someone, to do your homework, maybe even help someone get a job. It's just communicating in ways that don't have to be about small talk. I think that's one way to help our students these days realize that there's much more to technology than just using it like it's a toy.
There's a lot of things that we can do as educators to help students with their monitoring of their cell phones and their cell phone use in class to make sure that it's beneficial and not detrimental to their learning. I think the first and foremost is treating them like adults. So often they're treated like children by other adults in their lives that, they're on the cusp of becoming adults. And so they want to take that kind of ownership. So I think that's the first thing, is just having that conversation. And then teaching them how to use their cell phones responsibly by modeling, right? So the first thing I do with every class when I start is I show them my cell phone. I show them that I'm putting it on silent and I turn it face down so that they know I'm giving my undivided attention to them. They are more important than whatever is on that screen. And so they appreciate that. And a lot of them, I noticed as I would model that throughout the school year, I would notice some of them, they would come into class and they'd be on their phones. And when they saw me put my phone on silent and turn it with the screen down, they would do the same thing. So modeling that really helped.
At home, parents can take an active role in managing their child's screen time and have active conversations about their child's cell phone behaviors in class.
There's so many things that are beyond our control as educators. And so I think really working with parents and working as a community and working collectively to establish clear boundaries and guidelines as far as how much is appropriate, when is it appropriate, and, if necessary, taking it out of their reach, not making it accessible for them.
I do think a good practice, and one that I used raising my two boys, was that when it was bedtime, the cell phones would be in the kitchen. They were not allowed to go to bed with their cell phones. Because again, if you can't sleep, the first thing you're going to do is get on a cell phone. And so I think we as adults have to limit the screen time that students have, and particularly when they're home. But I also believe that our teaching staff need to be trained on how to best incorporate technology into their teaching, into the curriculum, and the use of cell phones is a great opportunity to check for that understanding before kids leave the classroom.
While many educators are allowed the opportunity to determine which cell phone policy is best for their classes, some feel that a more restrictive cell phone policy would be beneficial for students.
I think that it would be nice if school was a place where kiddos were disconnected from their cell phone. I think that that break would be helpful for their overall well-being and their mental health. Also, it would encourage actual connection, right? Like in-person connection. It would encourage, it would decrease distractions, right, in the classroom and sort of in the learning process. And so I think it would be fantastic if campus was a cell phone free zone. And I think that that would positively impact our kids.
I would like it to be unanimously that cell phones are tucked away. I mean, totally placed away, turned off, because if they do this for testing, they can totally implement this for in class on an everyday basis, and take the pressure and the problems off the teacher's hand from having inconsistencies around campus and inconsistency between teachers.
I definitely think a cell phone has a big impact on a student and a student's grades. I feel like if the cell phone were to be eliminated, there would be more people getting better grades and actually doing well in school. Like, I know some teachers allow cell phones in the classroom, but I have had some teachers that completely banned using cell phones in class, and I realized that it really has helped me focus better, because once I have my phone put away, and once there's like a strict rule saying that there shouldn't be no phones out at all, then I know that, oh, I can't have my phone out. It's not okay at all. And the only other thing that I can do is listen to the lecture, because what else am I going to do, Like, I'm just gonna sit there. Like, if I don't have my phone, what else is there to do? Obviously, the only other thing I can do is focus and actually try and do some work.
I think if cell phones were removed, then some students' grades would go up more, but like some students, they just like don't pay attention and they're not even on their phones, so it'll just affect like a small margin of the class.
We're kind of in a place like a reckoning, right, with sort of how far we've come with media and with cell phones and technology and all the things, and it's really a double-edged sword. And I think that we're really starting to see the impact, right, the negative impact of having that handheld connected device at all times on our person. And I'm worried about our kiddos. I really am. And, I think that it is time that we implement some policies to reduce the access, right? And to do so that we foster human connection and positive mental health and all the other important things that need to be happening in the teenage years of development.
While there's no simple solution to solve problematic use of cell phones at school, perhaps we can minimize some of the negative impacts by engaging all stakeholders in the conversation.
Like anything else, I think you need to discuss it and learn about it. It's very easy to complain about a problem. Just talk about how bad it is. But what can you do to change that? And that is very hard. I don't expect everyone to do that. But if we are going to leverage technology, we need to talk to parents, educators, administrators, and students about how to use it responsibly.
The basic fact is that we should have all of our kids, as soon as they enter school, start learning about media literacy, because we're now getting into tools where we can now face swap. We now have tools that we can now change our voices. So just because you're watching a video does not mean that the video is real.
As educators, it's important that we really have to teach media literacy and how to build community, what is safe to engage online. What do you do if people are private messaging you, and how do you respond, and how do you notice red flags and when something might be going wrong? We have to explicitly start to teach that as educators and parents, working collectively so that students have the same message.
Parents have a responsibility to discuss technology with their students, set boundaries with technology with their students. Administration has a responsibility to provide workshops or seminars for both teachers, parents, and students on how to use technology responsibly. Again, if all you're going to do is say, don't use it, and there's no why, then what's the reason? Like, why would they bother putting it away? But I think everyone involved needs to take personal responsibility.